Hey everyone, I'm Ash, and you're listening to the Avenue podcast. In this series, we're diving into God's heart for justice. Through these conversations, we hope God's call to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly becomes a lived reality in your life. Hey Aaron, you just got back from Europe.
Yes, I did.
How was that?
It was great. We were gone. I just got married over the summer in Australia. So yeah, it was great. We went around Europe for 2.5 months. We went to 13 countries.
That's crazy.
And almost died from a bear attack. So that was pretty hectic. But
yeah,
how was your
That does sound really
week?
hectic. My week was good. This is the first week back after midsem break. So
you already had midsem.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I didn't do it. I actually took a break.
Nice.
Which was not study-wise not optimal, but
yeah, you need it for mental health, you know?
Yeah. Anyways, let's get started.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really excited for this episode because we're starting a new series all about kingdom, like God's kingdom and justice. All about justice. And so this first episode is going to be about God's heart for justice. So kind of like an overview, I guess. We're going to be looking at a really short passage or like a couple of verses. We're going to be looking at Micah 6, chapter 6, verses 6 to 8.
Yep.
But also the stuff like surrounding that. But this is going to be like what the heart of the episode is going to be about. So do you want to read those couple verses for us?
Yeah, 100%. So Micah 6 to 8, it says, "With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God."
I love that last verse. That's so super punchy.
Reflective. Makes you think.
Yeah, definitely. But it's yet so simple. And it just strips everything back. And it, it's really refreshing to hear because I feel like in the terms that we have today, justice has become really politicized.
Yeah.
Which I don't think there's anything too bad with that because it definitely has its time and place because it allows us to change policies and systems which prevent oppression and all that stuff. But I think the God's view of justice is so different, and like us as Christians, we have to like grapple with that and balance that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think justice means something different to everyone. I know, like when I hear the word justice, I immediately think of like crime, doing the right thing, and like a courtroom scene, and someone gets tried for something, and it's like, oh, justice. It's always like tied to penalty in my head. What does it bring up for you?
Yeah, I think justice especially in this kind of political climate, especially in university, I think of justice as like social justice and like protesting and like really like seeking out justice and rights for people. But yeah, like even us, like we have different views of justice. Like one is like a prevention of crime and like prevention of like bad things happening, and then the other is like an active like consequence and call to have rights and stuff. So I think that's just really interesting. But also that difference in what we think justice is and can also prevent actual change from happening because no one can agree what 100%. Justice is.
Exactly, and we're all fighting for different things.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you look at it from a Christian perspective, it can also make us it makes us read these types of passages differently.
With our own biases and stuff, And I even got that from initially reading it before I did any research. I'm like, oh yeah, this totally aligns with my sense of justice, but it doesn't align with like what I think other people's sense of justice is. So I think
that's cool. So should we get into what is biblical justice? And although we may not be able to answer that in this episode because it is a massive topic, maybe we can get a little bit closer to what God thinks for what justice is to God.
We can look at the original Hebrew word for justice, which is mishpat. And it's not as simple as in English. It kind of has like two ways that it can stretch. So it can be like restorative justice, or it can be like retributive justice. Are you familiar with those kind of terms?
Would you like to walk us through it?
So you're familiar, but I'm going to walk us.
I'm familiar, but I probably don't have the right and as good definitions as you have.
Okay, so retributive justice is maybe one that we're more familiar with in like a political like order, just society kind of thing, because that's like the consequences of your actions. So like
kind of like the penalty thing that
exactly.
Like, justice kind of meant more to me. Like I'm probably more on that retributive side of things.
So like you do this, so you deserve this. But restorative justice is a little bit different, and this is, I think, the most common, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, in Bible or biblical context, where it's like seeking out vulnerable people, and it's seeking out the people who are oppressed, and like and helping them out, and also removing barriers to prevent oppression as well, and advocating and changing structures to like prevent injustices. So I think that's really interesting. So which
already communicates I guess what justice is to God, and it kind of already shows us the heart of God, in that he's not, when he means justice, and I think justice is said somewhere between like, I shouldn't say figures because I'm not exactly sure, but justice is used a lot in the Old Testament, that word.
Hundreds of times.
Yeah. And you can read that and kind of just get this picture that God is angry and he's trying to judge everyone and all this kind of stuff.
Especially the Old Testament view of God. It's repeatedly, and even throughout Micah, the book, it's always, and all the prophets are like, Israel has done something wrong. They haven't obeyed the covenant that God initially gave them, so they're going to be punished. So it's hard to ignore that retributive side. And
normally that sticks so much stronger in our mind because it's such a more fearful picture that we kind of grapple to.
Definitely.
But let's kind of reread Micah 6-8, Micah 6:6-8, because that's not the picture I get at all in this passage. Something that sticks out to me a lot is this idea of the question being asked: what do we owe God? What do we need to give God in order to make our relationship with him right? And that's kind of how I take that. Do we need to give him our firstborn? Do we need to sacrifice our kids? Do we need to give, he's writing really poetically and saying like rivers of oil, which would have been super expensive, and all these fancy things. But no, we don't need to give calves. We don't need to give any of that. What does he want? Just to walk humbly with him and to do justly and to love mercy.
And like I think the voice that like verses 6 and 7 is like speaking to is like the voice of like the Israelites who have continually failed the covenant, who've continually failed God, and they're kind of saying like, what do you want us to do? Like your standards are too high for us. And
100%. And these things are kind of actually what was going down at Micah's time. People were starting to sacrifice to other gods. They were kind of backsliding that way. And the way that God wants them to get right isn't necessarily to give them everything that they can do in a worldly sense and in that way, but he wants them to start to walk humbly with him and to do justly. But that justly isn't retributive, it's restorative.
Because it's centered around love and humility.
And it's centered around this idea that God will take those steps first.
And it's, I don't know, when you take into the context of like in the verses before, which I'll read, it's God speaking to the Israelites, and in verses like 3-5, he says, "My people, what have I done to you? How have I burdened you? Like, answer me. I brought you up out of Egypt and redeemed you from the land of slavery. I sent Moses to lead you, and also Aaron and Miriam, my people, remember what Balak king of Moab plotted and what Balaam son of Beor answered. Remember your journey from Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the righteous acts of the Lord. And so like God is like pleading with them, and it's like you kind of see this like a courtroom style. Like this is what I imagine, like where God is like, please, like tell me, like what have I done to like what have I done to make you like feel like you've been led astray. And then it's always come back to in verses 6 to 8 where God says, or like where Micah says, like he has shown you Israelites what is good. Here it is. You just need to do these 3 things.
Yeah.
And you need to live in these 3 things.
Yeah. And it's so powerful, that point you were saying, because God was the one that reached out to them. God was the one that led them, even though they were in darkness. And I think that is God showing us what justice is. He's showing us that justice isn't about his punishment, but it's actually about following him and walking with him. Because when you do that, then you start to see all the other sorrows and all the other sins and pains around you, and that becomes something that I guess you have a problem with.
Yeah.
And you start to care about other people, their sickness, their issues, and all the different sins that are going around, because they affect people and they hurt people. And that's what I kind of see in this passage to mean to walk in justice. It doesn't mean to like running around and tell people they're wrong and try and bring about God's fiery vengeance, but it more means to see what is going on around you, the oppressed, the weak, and what can you do about it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this kind of ties in so well with the gospel message, because just as God had given the Israelites this gift of being the chosen people, they had like forgotten that, you know, and they're using their like state of righteousness. And they've just been basking in that, and they've just been keeping that to themselves, and they forget that they were once oppressed by the Egyptians. And I think that's so true for us, where like we've been saved by Jesus and what he's done for us, and we've been gifted that gift of salvation, but it doesn't stop there. We have to share that with other people. And when you're saying that, like something that comes to my mind is the parable of the unforgiving servant, and he is someone that owes a lot of money to his master. It's actually a massive sum of money, and he gets forgiven. So I guess the master sees mercy in him. He sees love for and compassion for this servant. But then he goes out, he's walking around, he meets a guy that owes him like $5, basically. And what does he do? He like tries to extort the money out of him. And I think that kind of notion of justice is kind of what some of us get caught up in, is maybe we haven't fully experienced God's like forgiveness, or we don't fully understand it. And then we go out on the field and we try and like force people into something, or we try and think that they owe us something. But I think justice can only happen, and we can only live in justice when we've actually, like you were saying, like with Jesus' salvation, fully understand what he's had mercy on us for. And it's our choice to respond whether we're going to have mercy on others. But it only comes from a place of like truly accepting your depravity. It's like, I owe this 100%. Massive thing to God. And knowing that that debt has been repaid for us. So why should we hold that against anyone else? And I really love how all of the things that we're called to do in verse 8 is really active. Like we're taught to love, which is not something that you can just exist as. You have to love, and you have to walk, and you have to act. It's a state of constantly. They're verbs. It's a state of constantly being. You can't just exist in the state of righteousness, because you know it's a gift that God has given you. It was made to be shared with the people around us, and that is so much more relevant now with the gospel. You know, I can imagine that like the Israelites may have had trouble grappling with that idea because they were seen as the chosen people, but you know, there's really no excuse for
100%. And I think when you operate out of that mindset that you're chosen, you're good with God, you're like perfect, nothing, you know, you're unbreakable, you're at the top, you start to then act differently to others. You know, I saw this reel, and it was saying like it was basically going through a study of what happens when you give people perks in like board games. And when you start to give people perks in board games, like in Monopoly, that's what this study was done on. Like for instance, if I go around, I collect $300, you collect 50. People started acting with no mercy. They started acting a little bit like sadistic towards the other one, and they were like really enjoying like showing them how much more money they had than the opponent. And that's just a board game.
But it's so reflective of what happens in real life, because the higher you get, the easier it is to exploit others, and you forget that, you know, if you came out of a place of oppression or of struggle, like you just, it's so easy to forget that. And that's what the Israelites have done. And that's what we can do so often.
100%. And you kind of think it wouldn't be like that, because you kind of think, hey, if I was rich, I'd be a good person and I'd have more money to give to people. But it's like, if we haven't dealt with what's going on there, can you really be injustice?
And I think also something that happens so often is that we redefine the parameters of justice. And that's why it's also so important to look to God for these things, because we know that they're unchanging, and we know that it's a concrete view. Like this whole idea of mishpat being restorative and preventative of injustice. It's not something that we can define ourselves, because justice comes from God.
100%. And it's something that, like, when I read the minor prophets and books like Hosea and Amos, you really get this picture that God hates people who, that's a pretty strong sentence, but God doesn't love the act of, God hates the act of benefiting off of other people's problems. And I can't say that I think about this a lot in my day-to-day life, but you see the evidences of it in society. And it's become so much of a thing that, like, we've been led to believe, which even I'm struggling with this idea that, like, there has to be bad in the world for, like, justice, or, like, you know, we're never going to achieve true justice, because someone out there is always going to be like wicked or something.
And I don't know. It's a hard thing to think about.
It is. It's like very complicated. It's mixed in everything. But the more I see what God's justice is, the more I realize, like, how much you don't achieve that by doing. You achieve that by sitting and walking and learning, by looking to Jesus.
And I think that, like, the end of Micah is really good for, like, overshadowing this view of God's idea of justice, and, like, that the whole idea of kingdom justice, as opposed to our earthly view of justice, which is biased and has all sorts of weird plot holes and whatnot in it. So, like, at the last two verses of Micah, in chapter 7, it says, "Who is a God like you, who pardons sin and forgives the transgression of the remnant of his inheritance? You do not stay angry forever, but delight to show mercy. You will again have compassion for us, and you will tread our sins underfoot and hurl all our iniquities into the depths of the sea." And I really love that Micah ends on this note of hope and like looking forward to this like idea of kingdom justice. Because that's what his heart of justice is all about, that it's so much more than his anger and it's so much more than his judgment, but it's about him delighting in showing mercy and grace. Yeah, absolutely. And to God, that is justice. Yeah, 100%. Showing us his mercy and his love. Yeah. And it does make me think of his kingdom. And one day we can live in that kingdom where it is fully just. Yeah, because his ultimate purpose is not to destroy, but to save and to redeem. So I think that's a really good note to sort of conclude this episode on, but I'm super excited to see what the future episodes like unwrap about, you know, the different aspects of justice and stuff like that. So thank you guys for coming along this journey with us. Thanks for listening to the Avenue podcast and our series on justice. We believe conversations about faith, life, and the scriptures help us to walk in our God-given potential. My name is Gracie, and if you want to learn more about our community and get in touch with us, you can connect with us through the handle @Avenue Mission on social media platforms.